Hi, welcome back to my channel, The Set at Home Mom, and today we're going to talk about a controversial topic, vaccines. Okay, so I think this is a mom-related topic that we could talk about, and heads up, I'm not entirely pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. I'm kind of just an in-the-middle person. So what got me interested in the whole vaccine debate was, considering that I've been working with children with disabilities for 10 years, I started to wonder why we're having this huge increase of kids with disabilities. Not just autism, but a whole sorts of things. And I think by the time I read a whole lot of things, it kind of came to mind that, okay, it's probably something environmental. And I did look into vaccines. I was in college when the infamous Wakefield paper was published and then supposedly was debunked. I know there's a lot more to it, but I'm not going to go into that information. When I was working as a behavior interventionist for over a year, all my clients had autism, and I did ask several parents, do they think the vaccine caused their child's autism? And most of them told me no. I had two that said yes, they believed the vaccine caused their child's injury. One of the parents, I don't know enough information to really verify the reliability of that. And the other one, I did get a lot more information from the mom. And when she kind of gave me the timeline of everything, it was very, very, very credible and I think very convincing that her child did have vaccine-induced autism. But she does say that she thinks there was way more to it in the environment and just her child's way his body is made up that contributed to a vaccine reaction. When I was teaching, I did have a student with a physical disability that the mom said was from vaccines. She had gotten her routine checkup and vaccinations, and shortly after that, her body began to physically deteriorate and had never recovered from that. And I was pregnant at the time when I had that student, and it was enough to make me go, you know, maybe I need to look into some of this vaccine stuff. And I decided to read the vaccine book by Dr. Bob Sears, and it did convince me to go ahead and vaccinate, but I decided that we would opt out of certain vaccines and we were not going to follow the CDC schedule. And the pediatrician we went with also was kind of very informed consent and would talk about each disease and the risk factors and looked at my child individually, and considering she was not in daycare, she was being breastfed, had a completely non-medicated natural birth, made a lot of sense to him that we're going to follow an alternative schedule. I was mostly worried that my child would be that extremely rare case that had a severe reaction to a vaccine or even could have died, because yeah, it does happen, and I think it's very rare, but it's still, when a parent, you want to do everything you can to protect your child, and I decided those risks of a vaccine injury outweighed the benefits of the vaccines and the risk of even dying from some of those diseases. So there were some of the vaccines we did get early on because they did carry a higher risk of death or severe injury. However, when you really looked at the numbers, the rate of death and severe harm even prior to the vaccinations was about, like, for most of them was like 0.0001%, somewhere around there, which meant 99.99% of the time you were going to survive. I think really just most at risk if you are a young child, infant, or an elderly person. And so far, so good. All three of my girls have followed pretty much the same vaccination schedule and no severe reactions, so we will continue to get vaccines for certain ones. The first one we did opt out of was the hepatitis B vaccine because I decided that I was going to look into that and found that it was created for babies with mothers that had hepatitis B because it was very likely it was going to be passed on to the child through birth. So it made sense to create that vaccine. So there's basically 0% chance your newborn baby is going to get hepatitis B, because it is transmitted basically by sex or drugs or birth. So there's just no reason to get that, and you're not going to convince me otherwise that a baby needs a hepatitis B vaccine, my child anyway. And there's a few other vaccines we just kind of was like, well, we can just wait on vaccinating on some of those, because the risk just of getting them or even dying from them was just incredibly rare. Now, before all this stuff, I was obviously very pro-vaccine, because it was everything I had kind of learned in school, that somehow vaccines saved all these lives, and it's the reason our country is so much better and healthy. And I think there's just way too much more information and things that kind of go along with it, and we can't just say it was ever just vaccines alone. So that kind of tells you where I am, kind of somewhere, person that's in the middle. I'm very, very much anti-mandate, because the government shouldn't get to decide what drugs should ever be put in you or your child's body. That is definitely something between you and your physician. And if your physician thinks they need to have the government involved, then you need to switch physicians. Since 1986, with the Vaccine Injury Act, no one can sue a pharmaceutical company that creates vaccines for a vaccine injury. It has to be reported through a system known as VAERS, VAERS, I believe is how it's spelled. And from there, some people from the government basically get to look at the stuff and decide if it was a vaccine injury or not, and they get to decide how much money you are worth. And a few $1 billion, I think, have been paid out to people that have been injured from vaccines. So that's kind of pretty concerning, that when in any other case there's a bad drug, you can kind of sue the makers for it, or try to anyway. You think about all those infomercials of lawyers saying, have you or a loved one been injured or died from such and such drug? And you can, be part of a lawsuit and sue them. And that kind of doesn't work with vaccines. And that's just a little scary, considering how much the government and pharmaceutical companies are kind of in on it. Just a little, should be enough to kind of make you be a bit of a skeptic. I think as a parent, we always want to do what's best for our child, and we're looking at what those good intentions are, what risks and outweigh the benefits to it. And if you are a homesteader or a homeschooling mom, you're already challenging what is today considered traditional and normal when you're going back to what was considered traditional. So you should really go ahead, if you've already got in one mindset, why not go ahead and take that mindset and look at vaccines, look at each vaccine individually, look at each disease individually, look at all the data that's available. There's data available really on kind of, you could say, both sides, and I think somewhere in the middle there's the truth. The science is definitely not settled when it comes to vaccines. There's just too much information out there to say otherwise, and I think a lot of times the science is rarely ever settled. I would recommend the book, and Bob Sears and another woman named Melissa have a podcast that I've been listening to called Vaccine Conversations, or The Vaccine Conversation, and they go over a lot of statistics and data. They're not totally anti-vax, and I think they try to do their best to remove certain biases and focus on certain things, except for being anti-mandate, which like I said, I'm definitely anti-mandate. And I definitely don't think the government schools should get to discriminate against individuals because they choose not to put a certain drug into their body. When you are forced to pay for government schools via taxation, you should not be denied said service. That's discrimination. And if everyone has an equal right to education, you deny that, then that's not right. Until people can opt out of paying taxes for government schools, then people have a right to use them, any government service. We don't just start saying, hey, you can't go to a government park because you don't have your vaccination. What, are we going to start carrying our vaccination records with us wherever we go? Government's going to have a little card. You know, they might someday. And the funny thing is teachers sure don't have to turn in any kind of vaccination record when they get hired. We could be totally, completely not vaccinated. No one ever asked us. And chances are, even as an adult, since being 90s, 80s, or maybe even a 70s kid, the vaccination schedule had fewer vaccines in them than they do today. So technically, an adult is not really vaccinated against everything. And there's also a pretty good chance that certain vaccines might have worn off from that childhood, since it does seem vaccines tend to wear off maybe 10, 20 years. So if you're not getting boosters, that effectiveness and your risk for carrying those is a little bit higher, since that artificial immunity is not lifelong like a natural immunity to certain diseases are. Anyway, from there, I think you should just maybe go in it as a skeptic or remove any presuppositions you have. Look at both sides. Maybe check out the documentary Vaxxed and either decide, are these parents a whole bunch of wackos, or is there some validity to their personal story? Like I said, as parents, we want to just do what's best for our kid. And I think as long as you have good intentions in what you're trying to do, and you've really carefully examined the evidence, and you haven't taken one extreme from hearing some people say, oh, vaccines cause autism, and you go, fine, I'm not going to vaccinate my kid. Or if you're on one stream and going, you know what, all these scientists and medical doctors and the government says it's okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And if either side's saying you just hate your kid because you won't vaccinate them according to what the government says, or you just hate your kid because you're injecting all these poisons in them, I think you're wrong when you take either extreme position. And I think there is truth and compromise to be found in the middle. Anyway, that's kind of gone on that. If I get a chance, I will try to put some sources in the description box, because I know it's something people always ask for. And there's just so much out there that I think you can just Google research it and just try to stay away from personal blogs, because I think both sides can misrepresent each other, and you've got a lot of strawmans and ad hominems. And if I see any ad hominems in the comment section, then I'm just going to, heads up, I'm just going to delete your comment, because ain't nobody got time for that. Let's be adults and put forth instructive conversations on that. All right, don't forget to subscribe.